Welcome back to the deep dive. This time, we've taken on a text that is, well, it's both sweeping in its history and just microscopically focused on moral consequence.
It really is.
You brought us Canto 1, Chapter 18, the complete 50-verse sequence, and it chronicles the life of King Parīkṣit, the insidious nature of this age of vice, and the moment a supremely disciplined king made one fatal, momentary error.
It's a remarkable piece of literature, and it's structured as a dialogue between Sutta Goswami and a gathering of sages.
Right.
That structure is key because it means we aren't just getting a story. We're getting, immediate philosophical analysis layered right on top of the history.
So our mission for this deep dive is to excavate this whole chapter.
Exactly. To understand not just the story of the curse, but the really profound lessons on governance, on spiritual discipline, and this idea of the non-reactive nature of a true saint.
Okay, let's do it. We need to go beyond just, summarizing plot points and really dig into the psychological and societal weight of these actions. So let's unpack that first segment, verses 1 through 4. It immediately establishes King Parīkṣit's, his unparalleled status.
It does. His life literally begins with a miracle. He was saved while still in his mother's womb by the grace of Krishna.
So that divine intervention sets him apart right from the start.
Absolutely. He is not just any monarch. He's a protected instrument of providence in a way. But the text frames his entire life between two extreme threats, the weapon in the womb and then the curse of death by the serpent Takṣaka later on.
And what's so fascinating is how he handles that second threat.
Yes, the text makes a very specific point, that he did not lose composure. He didn't fear because his consciousness was completely, utterly absorbed in the Lord.
That focus is just the core of his identity. His final act, it isn't a battle or some grand declaration. It's this quiet act of spiritual devotion.
He becomes a student of Vyasadeva's son, and then peacefully abandons his body on the bank of the Ganga. He turns the moment of his own death into the ultimate spiritual retreat.
And this leads right to one of the most powerful philosophical statements in the whole chapter, right?
Yeah.
Verse.
The most powerful. It states that anyone who continuously tastes the nectar of the Lord's stories, the Uddhamashokavartanam, will never be thrown off balance.
Not even at the moment of death.
Not even then. Parīkṣit's life becomes the living proof of this principle. It shows that, spiritual immunity is earned through constant remembrance, not just some divine birthright.
Okay, so King Parīkṣit has this incredible divinely backed immunity. But how does that protection translate into his actual rule on the ground?
That's where the text introduces the tension with the age of vice, the Kali Yuga. This is in verses 5 through 8.
And the political context is everything here.
It is. The age of immorality, Kali. It entered the world the moment Lord Krishna left the earth. But, and this is a massive caveat, the text says Kali cannot fully dominate the earth, while Parīkṣit rules as the sole vigilant monarch.
So his personal righteousness acts as a kind of force field.
The force field against the corruption of the age.
Exactly. And this is where the king's wisdom really, really shines through. A lesser ruler would just try to eradicate Kali with force.
Right.
But Parīkṣit doesn't hate the age of vice. He acts like a bee extracting nectar. He finds the utility in Kali. What is that utility?
It's an incredible paradox.
Oh.
He sees that in the age of Kali, good deeds succeed quickly and almost effortlessly. Kushalani Ashasiniyanti.
Oh, wow.
But bad deeds, on the other hand, require tremendous effort and often fail anyway. So the king essentially institutionalizes an ethical shortcut. He uses the subtle nature of the age itself to promote virtue.
So that's the deepest delight into managing a corrupt era. Don't fight the tide, redirect it.
Precisely. He's fearless toward the age of vice because he knows its limits. He sees Kali as a wolf that only poses a threat to the careless, the heedless. As long as the ruler and the people are vigilant, Kali is basically powerless.
That active intellectual engagement with the age is what makes his reign so exceptional.
And that's the key takeaway from this first part. Now, the narrative shifts from the king's history to the audience's reaction to it.
Right. We move to this narrative exchange, the second section, verses 9 through 23, where Sutta and the sages interact. Sutta finishes his narration and recommends that anyone seeking welfare must constantly absorb these stories.
And the sage's response, it's not just polite appreciation. It's a profound statement on the power of spiritual association. They exalt Sutta, wishing him eternal life. And then they use this breathtaking metaphor in verse 12.
The metaphor of the smoky soul.
The smoky soul Dhumatu Mardmana. It's so visual. They describe Sutta as administering the spiritual honey from Govinda's lotus feet to souls whose vision is just obscured by the smoke of this uncertain age.
So it suggests that most people in this age are just fundamentally confused, operating in a mental fog.
And Suta's narration is the one thing that cuts through that haze. It underscores the existential need for these stories. But then the sages take it even further in verse 13.
Yeah, this part is amazing. They declared they wouldn't trade a single moment in the company of the Lord's devotees for heaven, or even for liberation itself.
Which is a radical statement.
Wait, okay, hold on. If the goal of spiritual life is traditionally freedom from the cycle of birth and death, why would the sages say unequivocally that the company of a devotee is more valuable?
It is a radical statement, and I think it's a critique of self-centered spiritual pursuits. Liberation could be seen as this solitary achievement, right?
Yeah.
But the sages value service and community over that kind of individual escape. They recognize that in the company of the wise, you're continually drinking that nectar. The journey, the constant learning is far superior to the static endpoint of just being liberated.
That reframes the entire spiritual ambition. So they press Suta to elaborate more on Parīkṣit's story because it shows the path to that kind of active, dynamic liberation.
And Suta's reply is steeped in humility. He almost apologizes for his low birth. But he says that merely uttering the names of these great souls purifies him. And then he extols the Lord.
He really establishes the ultimate standard there. He points out that even the goddess of fortune serves the dust of the Lord's feet, but the Lord doesn't even desire her attention.
Right. And the water that washes the Lord's toenails purifies the entire universe. It just paints this picture of the Lord as the ultimate object of worship, and Suta as this very humble servant just relaying the story.
He ends this exchange with that beautiful bird analogy in verse 23.
The bird analogy, yes. He agrees to narrate, but says he can only fly as far as his own strength permits. It's a crucial sign of a reliable, self-aware narrator. He knows the limits of his own knowledge.
And with that, the stage is set for the inevitable downfall.
The ultimate dramatic turn.
It arrives in section 3, the king's lapse, verses 24 to 31. And this is where the king's carefully maintained spiritual immunity just momentarily fails because of sheer human exhaustion. He goes hunting, and he becomes severely hungry and thirsty.
And this is a classic textbook case of how physical deprivation can completely erode the ethical discipline of even a great leader. The text immediately links his physical misery to his mental collapse.
So he enters a hermitage looking for water.
And he finds this tranquil sage sitting there. The description of the sage's meditation is so specific. He'd withdrawn his senses, his breath, his mind, his intellect. He transcended the three states of consciousness.
He'd achieved a state of absolute non-activity, brahmabhutam avikriyam.
He's completely detached. But the king, with his dry throat, he interprets this detachment as an act of slight.
He asks for hospitality but gets nothing. No welcoming grass for a seat, no kind words, nothing.
And the king, just overcome by exhaustion and ego, feels profoundly disrespected.
That feeling of being disrespected of Ajanani Eva triggers this unprecedented surge of anger and envy and a putapurva emotion. An emotion he had never felt before.
Which tells you everything about the state he was on. His judgment was just totally clouded by hunger and ego.
And this leads to the error. In a moment of rage, he takes a dead snake gatasum iragam, and using the tip of his bow, he just places it over the sage's shoulder.
It's an act of passive-aggressive violence.
But here's the really interesting part. Before he leaves, he justifies it to himself. He debates whether the sage's stillness was genuine meditation or just a pretense masamathir.
So did he really believe the sage was a hypocrite?
Or was this just a desperate mental rationalization for a terrible act?
Given the king's established wisdom, it reads like self-deception. Exhaustion and this unprecedented anger led him to seek a flaw in the victim to excuse his own cruelty. And that single fleeting moment of arrogance, it becomes the central tragedy of the chapter.
His action sets up the immediate catastrophic consequence delivered by the sage's son in verses 32 to 37.
Yes, the boy. He's highly spirited, youthful, and he hears about this insult, and his rage just burns even hotter than the king's.
And the boy's immediate reaction is to condemn it as an unrighteous deed, arguing from a perspective of social hierarchy.
Right. He reminds everyone that the king is not divine authority itself. He's merely a guard appointed by the Brahmins, tasked with protecting the moral laws.
And he concludes that because Krishna, the ultimate regulator, has departed, the moral laws, the Dharma Setun, have been broken by the king himself. And this requires immediate divine-level punishment.
Which leads to the famous verbal thunder, the Vajra. With eyes red from anger, the boy curses the king, calling him the disgrace of the Kuru clan.
And the curse is horrifyingly precise. Let Takṣaka bite him on the 7th day.
The punishment for a moment of disrespect is death, and it is sealed instantly.
But the narrative immediately pulls back from the son's fury and pivots to the father's profound repentance. Verses 38 to 47, the son returns, cries when he sees the snake, and explains the curse to his newly awakened father.
And the sage awakens and is just immediately appalled. He does not approve of his son's action against what he calls the undeserving king. He laments the great sin committed, Mahad Anyati Kutam, for what he sees as a minor offense, an offense exacerbated by the king's exhaustion.
This is where we get the deepest lesson on governance. The sage immediately rebukes his son for dishonoring the king, whose irresistible power is the foundation of social welfare.
He explains the terrifying social contract. Without the king as protector, society collapses.
He paints a horrifying picture of utter chaos.
He does. He warns that without the protector, society becomes overrun by thieves. People immediately start killing, cursing, stealing property, women, animals. The established order of Vertramakara dissolves into absolute social mixing and lawlessness.
The king is the indispensable anchor.
He is the anchor that prevents civil society from reverting to the jungle.
So, the king's personal lapse is minor, but its consequence, the erosion of the ruler's sanctity, is catastrophic for everyone. The sage explicitly defends Parīkṣit as a protector of morality, a great devotee who was simply overwhelmed by fatigue. He didn't deserve the curse.
And in a final display of supreme character, the sage apologizes. But not to the king. He apologizes to the All-Soul for the sin committed by his immature son. He's instantly more concerned with the damage done to the cosmic order by his son's anger than with the indignity he suffered himself.
Which brings us to the climax of the chapter, verses 48 through 50, defining the nature of the true saint. The sage, the Mahamunya, didn't even waste a moment thinking about the offense from the king.
Not a moment. His entire focus was absorbed in remorse over his son's sin. And this gives us the ultimate spiritual standard. The text highlights the defining trait of the Lord's devotees. Even if scorned, cheated, cursed, struck, or killed, they do not retaliate.
Even if they have the power to do so.
Even when they possess the power. The sage had that power, but he chose inner focus instead.
It's a perfect symmetry. The king, a great devotee, fails because he succumbs to external material qualities, hunger, thirst, anger. But the sage, also a devotee, succeeds because he demonstrates the ultimate spiritual ideal. He is non-reactive.
Yes, truly saintly persons, subjected to duality, pleasure, and pain, they neither suffer nor rejoice, because their soul is beyond the influence of those material qualities.
So the chapter uses the king's momentary failure to perfectly illustrate the essential requirement of a ruler's vigilance and the required non-reactive nature of a true spiritual guide.
It's a full circle. We began with Parīkṣit's divine protection, we witnessed his very human moral failure, and we ended with the sublime philosophical standard of non-retaliation that only the sage could uphold.
It's a complete arc. From divine grace to human frailty to ultimate spiritual transcendence. And it gives us so much to think about, really, regarding the fragility of social order.
It does. This remarkable deep dive into the source material leaves us with, I think, a provocative thought. If the established social order is so fragile that disrespecting one devoted king, even in a momentary lapse, immediately invites utter chaos and collapse, how much foundational respect and hospitality must we maintain today in our complex and often disrespectful modern society, simply to keep the walls of civil life from collapsing? It shows the power of the smallest act to create the largest consequence.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today we are diving headfirst into a really powerful story from the ancient Sanskrit epic, the Śrīmad Bhāgavatam. It's all about a great king, a meditating sage, and how one single fateful mistake can unleash an irreversible curse. So our main character here is King Parīkṣit. And look, before we get into all the drama, you've got to understand that this guy's life started with a literal miracle. He was saved from certain death while he was still in his mother's womb, which basically marked him from birth as someone with a really special protected destiny. And this wasn't just any old ruler. Parīkṣit was the gold standard. You know, the kind of king they write legends about. See, in their worldview, the king's character had a direct impact on the well-being of the whole planet. So understanding just how good he was makes the tragedy of this story hit so much harder. He was celebrated as a Mahabhagavata, which is a huge title. It means a great devotee, someone whose entire life was about upholding what's right. Now, this is so important because as the emperor, his own personal goodness had this massive cosmic impact. He was so just, so powerful that his very presence was said to literally hold back the age of darkness. He was for real, the pillar holding up the whole world. But even the greatest people get tested. And for King Parīkṣit, that test showed up on what seemed like a totally normal day out on a hunting trip. And this one encounter, born out of just pure exhaustion and thirst, was about to change absolutely everything. The king wasn't just out having fun. This was part of his royal duties. But the chase went on forever, the sun was beating down, and he just got completely wiped out. We're talking totally drained, suffering from this intense hunger and a burning thirst that was starting to really mess with his head. So, desperately looking for water, he stumbles upon this quiet little hermitage, an ashram. It must have looked like heaven to him, this perfect sanctuary. All he wanted was a little water and maybe a moment to rest from the sage he saw inside. So he finds the sage, Śamīka, but here's the thing. The sage wasn't just sitting there quietly. He was in samadhi. And that's a state of meditation so deep that you are completely 100% unaware of the outside world. Eyes closed, breath steady, mind totally withdrawn. For all practical purposes, he wasn't really there. And this is where the story takes a sharp turn. The king, exhausted, desperate for a drink, asks for water and gets nothing. Total silence. Now imagine you're this all-powerful emperor, used to getting respect, and you get completely ignored. To him, that felt like a massive slap in the face. And you can just feel his frustration starting to bubble up. So it's this disastrous chain reaction, right? He asks for water, gets no answer, and that makes him feel slighted. In his exhausted state, that feeling just blossoms into the sudden, shocking rage, something the text says was totally out of character for him. And in that one moment of weakness, he does something unthinkable. He uses the tip of his bow to pick up a dead snake off the ground and just drapes it over the meditating sage's shoulders. Then he turns and leaves. The king is gone, but what he did definitely did not go unnoticed. While the sage himself has no clue what just happened, word gets out, and it quickly reaches his son, a young boy who happens to be powerful, brilliant, and has a famously short fuse. And look at the difference here. It's a total contrast. On one side, you have the father, Śamīka, completely peaceful, detached from the world in his meditation. And on the other, you have his son Śṛṅgi. He's out playing with his friends, very much in the world. And when he hears the news, he just explodes with this white-hot rage. For Śṛṅgi, this wasn't just, "You insulted my dad." No, he saw it as a catastrophic failure of duty. In his mind, kings were supposed to be like watchdogs, right? Protecting the sages, the spiritual masters of society. So for a king to attack a sage, that was like a dog turning on its owner. It was a fundamental violation of how the world was supposed to work. So, fueled by all this righteous fury, the kid takes a sip of holy water and just unleashes this verbal thunderbolt. With all the power of his spiritual training, he declares a fatal and totally irreversible curse. In 7 days, King Parīkṣit will die from the bite of the great serpent king, Takṣaka. So, when the sage Śamīka finally comes out of his meditation, he sees the dead snake around his neck. His son tearfully tells him the whole story, explaining how he avenged the insult. But the sage's reaction? Well, that's the biggest twist in this entire story. He wasn't angry at the king, not even a little bit. Instead, he was just filled with absolute horror and regret for what his own son had done. He instantly understood that a terrible injustice had just happened, not by the king, but to him. And this is where you really see the sage's wisdom. He's looking at the bigger picture. He's thinking, wait a minute, for a tiny little offense, my son, in his ignorance, just handed down a death sentence? He understood the king was just tired and thirsty and didn't deserve this. But even more than that, he knew that without a good king, society falls apart. People become vulnerable, like unprotected sheep at the mercy of thieves and chaos. So in the end, the sage isn't even thinking about the snake on his shoulders, the disrespect he suffered. His only thought is for the huge sin his son committed out of immaturity and the terrible, terrible loss the world was about to face with the death of such a great king. He's just mourning the destructive power of anger that's totally out of control. This whole ancient story leaves us with a question that is just as relevant today as it was thousands of years ago. Both the king and the sage's son acted out of a feeling, one of being disrespected, the other of righteous anger. But their reactions had these permanent, devastating consequences. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Where is that line between justified anger and a destructive force that ends up causing way more harm than the original problem?